Welcome to Frontlines of Social Good, the weekly news and views program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I'm Jay Frost. Today, we'll begin with the top 5 gifts of the week and look at the headlines shaping philanthropy, fundraising, and social impact. Then in our first segment, we'll explore why some U.S. donors are shifting abroad, what's driving this surprising trend, and how it could reshape the global philanthropic landscape. I'll be joined by Will Whitefield, Research Director at The Factory, to unpack the latest findings. In our second segment, we'll turn to new data closer to home. Tim Sarrantonio, chair of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, joins me to share the latest results from their national study, what they reveal about donor retention, giving patterns, and the health of the sector. Let's get started. Here are this week's top gifts, and there are plenty of ties. We are going to start in reverse order, as always, with number 5. $10 million from Amy and Mark Meadows to the Baltimore Museum of Art to establish a permanent education endowment. It's the largest gift for education in the BMA's history and will expand K-12 access, transportation, and family programs so more Baltimore area students and caregivers can use the museum as a learning space. Also coming in at $10 million from Heidi Charlson and her late husband Lou Woodworth to Washington State University's Veterinary Teaching Hospital. Finalized through their estate plans, the gift will help build WSU's new veterinary teaching hospital in Pullman and strengthen emergency, critical care, and scholarship support for veterinary students. At number 4, another tie. $20 million from Antonio Gracias through the Gracias Family Foundation to the University of Chicago. The gift will support faculty research and student advancement, including the Gracias Family Center for Human Sciences and Well-Being and related funds housed at the Becker-Friedman Institute, giving University of Chicago new flexibility to back high-impact scholarship. Also at $20 million, James J. and Joan A. Gardner Family Foundation, a gift to the University of Cincinnati Gardner Neuroscience Institute. This pivotal gift will accelerate research, expand specialized care in memory and movement disorders, and advance UC's long-term effort to improve lifelong brain health. Number 3, once again, another tie. $25 million from Carol and Ned Speaker to the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital, Stanford. Their gift will modernize the hospital's West Building, home to the Johnson Center for Pregnancy and Newborn Services, so mothers, babies, and medically complex newborns can receive world-class care in updated, family-centered space. Also, at $25 million, a gift from the estate of Charles H. Skip Smith to the Arboretum at Penn State. Smith, the alumnus whose earlier $10 million gift helped create the Arboretum, capped his lifetime philanthropy with this bequest to fuel new gardens, education, and research, securing the Arboretum's growth for future generations. Number 2, and yet another tie this week, $100 million from billionaire philanthropist Sylvan Adams to Soroka University Medical Center in southern Israel. After the hospital was damaged in the Iranian missile attack, this gift will help rebuild and fortify the region's main trauma center so it can continue life-saving care for civilians across the Negev. Also at number 2, $100 million from the Edward Fine Charitable Trust to UCSF to name and permanently endow the Edward and Pearl Fine Memory and Aging Center. The unrestricted gift will accelerate dementia research, expand clinical care, and support education at one of the world's leading centers for Alzheimer's and related disorders. And number 1 this week, a large gift of many components, $253 million in grants from Tom Golisano to 6 university-based children's hospitals across the United States, creating a new Golisano Children's Alliance. Each hospital will receive major funding, many at the $50 million level, to expand pediatric specialty care and access, making this one of the largest multi-hospital pediatric philanthropy commitments in recent years. Have we missed a big gift announcement this week? I'm sure that we have. Let us know by contacting me directly through LinkedIn or by email at j@donorsearch.net. Now for our top stories of the week. As of this week, the federal government shutdown has reached 35 days, tying the 2018-2019 impasse as the longest in U.S. history. And if it continues one more day, it will set a new record. Nearly 880,000 federal employees have been furloughed or required to work without pay, the largest number ever affected by a funding lapse. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the shutdown is costing the U.S. economy $7 billion to $14 billion, while programs like SNAP and Head Start have been disrupted nationwide. Nonprofits say they're feeling the strain firsthand, serving as a stopgap for millions of families now cut off from federal assistance. A federal judge in Massachusetts has already said the Trump administration has to tap contingency funds so November SNAP benefits can go out. But even the administration's own statements make it clear it will only be partial funding, about half of a normal month, for the roughly 42 million people who rely on the program. In Western Pennsylvania, the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank told WPXI that people will get only part of what they normally receive, and local nonprofits are formulating plans for households that won't see full benefits this month. And in California's North Bay, the Redwood Empire Food Bank is already increasing senior baskets and fresh produce because confusion over when SNAP will be paid is driving more people to distributions, according to ABC7. Businesses and community groups there have started pop-up drives to backstop families who suddenly don't have a full month of benefits. Houston area outlets are reporting something similar on the military side. Pantries serving Fort Hood families are running low, so Houston activists have launched food drives specifically to support them while the shutdown drags on. And it isn't just food. According to Radio Iowa, nonprofits that help low-income Iowans pay winter utility bills don't know how much federal money is coming or when, making it hard to promise help just as temperatures begin to drop. United Way calls this a double crunch. Nonprofits were already dealing with earlier federal cuts, and now the shutdown is pushing people who should be getting federal SNAP or energy assistance straight to local charities. That's not sustainable, they say, because SNAP alone moves about $8 billion a month, far more than food banks can possibly match. We'll hear more firsthand about the impact of this series of events on America's food banks in our forthcoming interview on the PM podcast with Julie Yurko, President and CEO of the Northern Illinois Food Bank. In another federal versus local story, the nonprofit sector is once again heading back to court. This week, the National Council of Nonprofits, joined by major labor unions and the cities of Boston, Chicago, Albuquerque, and San Francisco, filed suit against the U.S. Department of Education over a new public service loan forgiveness rule. The lawsuit argues the regulation would let the Trump administration disqualify nonprofits whose missions don't align with its policies, including groups advancing racial equity, immigrant protections, and LGBTQ rights. Council President Diane Yentl says, quote, "The law doesn't allow administrations to pick and choose nonprofit eligibility based on ideology. This attempt must not stand," end quote. The case, National Council of Nonprofits et al. Versus McMahon, was filed in federal court in Massachusetts with representation from Protect Borrowers and Democracy Forward. Yentl says the goal is to keep PSLF what Congress intended, a bipartisan promise to everyone who serves their communities regardless of politics. Now, in an announcement that's bound to raise eyebrows following its recent controversy over nonprofit fundraising pages, GoFundMe has launched a new product line, digital gift cards that let recipients donate to a charity of their choice. According to TechCrunch, the cards start at $5 and can be sent by email or text with themes for holidays, birthdays, and other occasions. Each card can be redeemed to support one of about 1.4 million verified nonprofits through the GoFundMe Giving Fund, the company's fee-free donor-advised fund launched earlier this year. The purchaser of the card, not the recipient, receives the charitable tax deduction. Funds can be donated immediately or held within the giving fund for future use, similar to traditional DAF structures. GoFundMe says the goal is to make charitable giving, quote, as easy as buying a cup of coffee. But the timing is notable. The move comes just weeks after questions were raised about the company's nonprofit fundraising pages and its growing role as a potential gatekeeper for charitable donations. It's not every week that philanthropy makes the front page of the Financial Times, but this week it did. The FT reports that US philanthropists are moving hundreds of millions of dollars into UK charitable structures, as some of America's wealthiest donors take precautionary action amid the Trump administration's renewed attacks on nonprofits. Advisors told the paper they've already helped set up or transfer funds worth as much as $200 million for individual US donors, part of what one expert called an unprecedented wave of cross-Atlantic philanthropy. The motivation? Concern that the administration could restrict or penalize nonprofits engaged in work on diversity, equity, climate, or human rights, all targets of what's been described as a war on woke. The UK offers familiar legal frameworks, strong financial systems, and, as one lawyer put it, a robust regulatory environment. The result? More than 200 US-based nonprofits have already applied to register as UK charities this year alone. So what's really happening here? Is this a short-term hedge or the beginning of a larger shift in where and how American philanthropy operates? To help us understand the data behind the headline, I spoke with Will Whitefield, Research Director at Factory, a firm that tracks new charitable trusts across the UK and Europe. Here is that conversation. Thank you very much for sharing today. I'll be really interested in hearing your perspective on an article that I know that was shared by one of your colleagues, Chris Carney, who's been on our podcast. And it was from the Financial Times, a piece that suggested that US donors are moving potentially hundreds of millions of dollars into UK charitable structures. We can talk about that, but we can also just talk about what you're seeing. And perhaps I should start by just asking if you could talk a little bit about Factory and what you all track.
Absolutely, yes. Thanks, Jay. So Factory, we're a prospect research agency in the UK. We're set up by Chris Carney back in the 1990s. I've been with Factory since nearly 20 years now. And we work across a wide range of strategic donors, so primarily major donors, high net worth individuals, but also trusts and foundations. So we've been producing what we call our new trust update for over 30 years now. And that's where we look at newly registered grant makers in the UK at the Charity Commission in the UK. And we produce a report, we've got our database, and we've been able to track UK grant makers, as I say, for over all this time, and look at the different trends that can appear in the UK grant making market. We also provide a wide range of other research services, but trusts and foundations is definitely one of the main areas that we look at here.
Trusts and foundations, are they a big part of the UK philanthropic landscape?
Very much so. I think, there's a large crossover between high net worth individuals and trusts and foundations. More and more people are trying to formalize their philanthropic giving by setting up a charitable trust or foundation. Obviously, there are tax benefits associated with that, but more often it's also about having that sort of regulatory framework in place, making sure it's all kind of audited and clear and transparent. We see a large number of high net worth individuals each year are setting up their own trust and foundations. We've also got trusts and foundations in this country that have been around for 100 odd years or so. So there is a mix, and it's changing. So the traditional grant maker model, where you would have an endowment or an investment that would generate income, and they would receive applications and we can give out money. They still exist, but also we have finding a lot more newer funders nowadays are quite specific. The people who are setting them up, they've got really clear ideas about what they want to fund and who they want to fund. So they're a lot more restrictive. They're far more targeted in terms of their giving. So they're not this sort of just write a check and get on with it sort of funders. They want to be more involved. They want to build longer, more in-depth relationships with the people that they're supporting. Um, and there's more transparency. People, more funders are having websites where we can actually read about what it is they're after, rather than this opaque sort of behind closed doors feel that some of the older funders certainly had. Um, so I think, I mean, it's hard to do, sort of hard to give you exact figures in terms of what percentage of income comes to trust foundations, but it is certainly one of the main areas of income for a lot of UK charities.
And speaking of transparency, I guess that's one of the difficulties with even the Financial Times reporting here. And it's not to take issue with it. It's just that they are reporting that there are hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe more than that, flowing from US major donors or ultra high net worth individuals, high net worth individuals into charitable structures, presumably trusts, and other types of instruments in the UK. And I guess their supposition, and first of all, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but their supposition is that they're doing so because it allows them to park that money in the UK and give charitably if they wish, without necessarily the kind of the political environment that we're encountering right now in the US. So first of all, let me check and make sure that I'm interpreting the article correctly. I know you didn't write it, but that's correct. But also, is that what you are seeing currently?
So um, with our new trust update, when we're looking at newly registered UK sort of UK grant makers, I haven't noticed that this a big surge of funders being created from with settled by US nationals. We normally see two, three, four a year coming through. High net worth Americans setting up a UK foundation or setting up a sister organization to an existing US foundation. Um, but I haven't seen that notable uptake that is referred to in that article. Um, which doesn't mean it's not happening. And I think there are many other ways in which people can move money and put it into structures over here. Donor advised funds, I would imagine, is probably one of the largest things. I know that that's a big area in the US. It's not as big in the UK, the donor advised fund market. It's growing. The issue with donor advised funds, as I'm sure you're aware, is that lack of transparency. The whole point is to be able to give slightly anonymously. Um, so if what they are saying in that article is true, and that large volume, large quantities of money are being moved over here, I haven't seen it. We're not seeing that kind of people setting up their own charitable trusts. It's probably going into donor advised funds, and I can see that would totally make sense, really, because you need to have a board of trustees. You need to have an accountant that needs to be audited. You need a bank. You need an accountant. You need trustees. Um, much of that can be provided through family offices, I suppose. So if these are high net worth individuals and have a family office, they would probably have a legal team over here that would be able to do that. But equally, a family office has probably got a close relationship with a private bank or something like that, and they're able to provide all of those services in one. So it probably does make it a lot easier just to sort of go, well, let's put our money into a donor advised fund. It can be dispersed. They have control over it. They can nominate organizations they would like to give the money to, or it can be dispersed on their behalf. And it doesn't require as much administration, I suppose, on their kind of part. Um, so I can't comment whether the article is true. I got to assume it is, and the sources that they were using, most of them were talking about donor advised funds. I think the Youth Philanthropy Capital, for example, that's a large donor advised fund here in the UK. CAF, the Charities Aid Foundation, it's another large donor advised fund. So that would lead me to assume or presume that they are using donor advised funds to moving their money over here.
A couple questions on that. First, on the historical trend, because as you said, you've been doing this work just with Factory for the last 20 years. So if you only see two, three, or four of these kind of instruments being established in the UK on behalf of US nationals on a regular basis, are you seeing any other trends over that 20-year period, especially now, that might be important for people in the UK, the US, other people interested in philanthropy to take note of, besides the growth of the DAFs, and that's what I want to ask you about next, but any
Mhm.
in general.
Well, as I say, I mean, I think the trends that we've seen that I alluded to earlier is probably more in that the level of involvement and connection that funders want with their beneficiaries. Um, we're seeing, sort of more and more trusts and foundations, they're not open to applications. They're set up with specific aims, want to foster close relationships with their funders. So as I say, instead of saying, write us a letter, tell us what you're doing, and we'll write you a check, they are being far more narrow in their focus. Um, about 10 years ago, we saw a real rise in venture philanthropy. And that is still a trend I think that we're seeing, particularly with people from private equity backgrounds who are setting up their trusts and foundations, and people from the financial services and financial services companies does make up quite a large number of the larger new foundations that we're able to see over the last 10 years. And they're the ones who want, who really want to see that social return on investment. They really want to know the impact that their investment or their funding is going to have, and they want to see it reported on. And they will have a smaller portfolio of beneficiaries that they will work with over a number of years. So that's been the trend that I've noticed for sure. Um, I did some bit of research recently looking at the philanthropic areas of interest of funders over years. And one of the trends which I wasn't able to notice, obviously, education and health are always very well, popularly supported. But two of the areas which I've noticed real growth in is environment. So obviously climate change is becoming a real pressing issue, and mental health. Those are the two areas which, in terms of the number of funders each year that are set up that have got a stated interest or identified interest in those areas, those are areas which have been growing. So that's an interesting trend that has come to light by looking at analyzing historical data that we've got access to here. Um, and yeah, no, so I think that kind of the climate change and mental health was really fascinating. Particularly, I mapped it against press article references, so using so our press database, looking for references to climate change or mental health, and plotting the graph of those over time, and then plotting the graph of funders funding those things. They match each other pretty amazingly. So that's a really good example of the sort of responsive nature of philanthropy and people kind of reacting to causes and issues as they come along.
Again, that was Will Whitefield of The Factory, and you can find out more about them at Factory, which is spelled FACTARY.com, and they're based out of the UK. My thanks to Will for coming in very quickly to provide a little color analysis on that article. One thing I will point out is that after the interview, he did make sure to emphasize the fact that there is a 3 to 4 month lag between registering a new trust and information reaching the public in the UK. And as he also pointed out in our discussion, donor advised funds need not file any such disclosure at all. For those reasons, Factory and others do not necessarily know about the existence of newly created charitable instruments funded by US nationals unless and until that information is disclosed by the government or gifts are made and publicized by the recipients or the donors. Next, we turn from international trends to data closer to home. Tim Sarrantonio, chair of the Fundraising and Effectiveness Project and a frequent guest on the Philanthropy Mastermind series, met with me to break down the latest results of FEP, what they show about donor retention, giving patterns, and the overall health of the sector. And here is our conversation. Tim, thank you so much for being here to talk about the Q2 results, or I should say the second quarter of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project results. For people who don't know what FEP is all about, can we start there? Can you tell us what this information is all about and why it's important?
Yeah, thanks, Jay, for having me. Always excited to talk about the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. So, I'm Tim Sarrantonio. I am chair of this initiative. And since 2006, actually, we've been looking at overall donor trends, individual giving trends in the nonprofit sector. So, we specifically focus in through an anonymized data process that has 10 different data providers. So people that, we've heard of, Bloomerang, Neon One, Donor Perfect, etc., that we look at data on a monthly basis, actually, and it looks at, the size of the gift, whether the person gave to the same nonprofit over and over again. And generally we don't know who these people are, but we tend to use this as a benchmark for retention rates in the sector, things like growth in giving in the sector. And so what this is overseen by is by the Association of Fundraising Professionals Foundation and Giving Tuesday. So even though data providers are involved, we're not seeing any of the data. We don't know anything in terms of these people other than what are the larger trends that we as a sector should be paying attention to. So we put out quarterly reports. People can get them at fepreports.org. Very easy website. And so this looks all the way through June 2025 in terms of what individuals are doing. So we're not looking at anything with the federal grants or stuff like that. This is really explicitly focused on what the average everyday donor is doing.
Okay, well, let's take a quick look right now at what you found this quarter, and then maybe look at how this differs from a year ago as well as that last quarter of the year.
Yeah, so I would say kind of the larger macro context, and this is a bit of the bummer way that we have to address it, is that the usual soundtrack that plays around FEP reports is dollars up and donors are down. And one of the things that we are learning and that we are unpacking, especially when we start to look at what we've seen in Q2, is that this is not a weather report, Jay. This is not something to go look and say, oh, wow, that looks bad. Not sure how that affects me, other than maybe I should get an umbrella at some point. You have an active role as a fundraiser when looking at this. So one of the larger things I want to point out before I get into the Q2 results is we also, in parallel, did some research with fundraisers. We polled just shy about 400 individuals who fundraise through a survey. And we asked them, what are you doing with this data? How are you using this type of data? And the vast majority are using it to educate their leadership and to strategically plan. So when we look at something like Q2, what somebody even looking at it now as they head into November, December, and 2026 is to say, okay, how is this going to potentially affect my year-over-year retention rate? How is this going to impact my ability to cultivate major gifts? And so what we saw in Q2, I'm going to start with the silver lining of the dollars up, donors down, is that in previous years, especially, we were seeing in Q2, heading into 3, heading into end of the year, that there would be an acceleration of the retention rate dropping, where we would see a little bit of a concerning, oh man, it's actually looking like it's speeding up, that less people are giving.
And here we're talking about a trend that's been continuing for years. So
Yes.
before you jump into what that the decline is, even though it is, albeit it's softening, what are we looking at historically here? Well, give us some context.
Yeah, I mean, look, across the board, retention rate has barely been 50% and hovering in the lower 40s for a few years now. And if we look at the larger context, people say, and Jay, you do such a good job talking about things like Giving USA, for instance. What we should think about this data is if Giving USA looks at the entire pie, for instance, of all of giving, bequests, foundations, individual giving, and we have that, 66%, I believe, is the most recent number of individual giving. This sits within that. And so what we've tended to see whenever we get the final results year over year, we look at 2020, 2020, 2021, 2022, is that people overall just don't come back, especially after the first time giving to a nonprofit. A lot of times they say, that was nice, but not for me. And so when we talk about overall retention rate and we talk about things being in the 46%, 44% range overall, that is the vast majority of that is being held up by people who are giving much larger gifts and people who are giving especially multiple gifts. Like the most recent data, for instance, now I can start to lead into a little bit of that. People who gave 7+ gifts per year, their retention rate was 86.2% heading into this quarter. Not a surprise, but that means that they were doing that in 2024. So 86, near 87% of people who gave a lot of different gifts last year, and that could be recurring gifts, right? Somebody's given something monthly. They could be sending in a check as a tithing situation, for instance. There's a lot of different behavior that ultimately FEP doesn't ultimately tell us why, right? That's a big caveat that I want to also put here, is that there are limits to this data. It's very transactional. So we have to also tease out, and this is where good fundraisers especially are going to go, but why? But why? And that's what we want people to ask too when they look at this data. But people who give multiple gifts, people who give very large gifts, $50,000 and above, they tend to have extremely high retention rates, or simply put, they like to come back and they like to give again. And one of my favorite items that got pointed out to me by a donor, actually, Lisa Greer, she asked the question, do people know that they're supposed to give more than 1 year? Right? And I thought that was an interesting thing in terms of, are we educating people about the need that continues to happen? That is one of those items that FEP's not going to tell us that, but exploration with your community might tell you, oh, well, if I'm having trouble keeping people who gave to me for the first time, maybe I need to do something different here. So at the very minimum, like we kind of hinted at, the rate of people not wanting to give again slowed going into Q2, and that's a good thing.
First-time donors here. You're talking.
Yeah, well, across the board, actually, I would say
okay.
that overall donor engagement is stabilizing. That's kind of the opinion of the Giving Tuesday team and the broader fundraisers subcommittee, is that this is a good thing that we hope to continue to see. And obviously, we want to turn that number back around. We want it to go back up, but stabilization is the first step.
Okay. So what are the percentages right now of the donor retention percentage?
So it's always hard to kind of get into that in the middle of the year, but I would say that what we're seeing is that overall retention, for individuals. So first-time donor retention tends to be about 18%. That's the historical one. So if I even pop down, if you go to fepreports.org, we also have these breakouts. But let me take a look at the retention rate series for new donor retention rate, 11% right now. Now, remember, that's Q2. So those numbers always go up. We might even see like people who give a lot. That number halfway through the year might not be amazing. And that's because when do a lot of gifts come in?
Right, exactly. And I know we're going to go there next.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make you dig into all the results or have to do it from memory, but do you have a general sense about how that is year over year as well as quarter over quarter, that 11%? Because as you point out, that's one quarter. It doesn't tell the whole story, but it does tell a story.
I have positive news, at least in terms of the negativity. The year over year change in that new donor retention rate compared to last year was a big fat 0.0. We're even. It didn't get worse. And in general, the repeat rates, those types of rates that are specific to different types of giving behavior are staying. This is what we mean by stabilization. It didn't get worse. So again, we want to see that number increase. We hope to see that go up in Q3, for instance, hopefully. But year over year, it was a big fat 0 at the very least for that new donor retention rate. So it's at 11%, but at least it was 11% last year. So,
which I know sounds terrible, but part of this is, again, you said it, that this information is transactional by nature. That's because they're not going to give you all the information. Each of the data providers, the vendors, are not going to provide all their data. What they're doing is they're providing bulk anonymized data on very specific data points. And would you mind reviewing those quickly? I think there are 3 or 4 that you look at.
Yeah, well, and actually, this is good kind of recap because while we've been in operation since 2006, it started actually, I believe, under the Urban Institute. When it moved to Giving Tuesday and AFP Foundation sharing the initiative as a whole, and especially in last September, we started a new governance process. And so that process has done a few key things to advise Giving Tuesday and AFP Foundation on what to do. One of those is expansion of the data set with the data providers. So right now, you're right, we have a very limited set of, an anonymized first donation date, an account ID, if you've ever used a constituent relationship management, a CRM database. It might have an ID number for, J Frost is 1679, right? So if we see that number come up multiple times, that's a good thing. That's where retention comes in. What we're looking to add is, and some data providers already do this. So this is what we're aiming for is consistency on geographic information. So a little bit more itemization there. Our government relations committee is very interested in that because that aligns with kind of being able to understand geographic information that may impact, what certain individuals in certain states are doing. That information actually, FEP data was very helpful for informing the tax bill that came out earlier this year. Some positives there, not completely positive, but at least a little bit there that we were able to use that data. But also like recurring giving flags. So that's an important one that like a lot of people are interested is we might see repeat donations, but I can tell you from personal experience that that's kind of a pain in the butt to actually intuit the real behavior there versus I know for a fact that that's a recurring gift that's happening on a monthly basis via credit card, right? Like that's the type of thing that we on the data provider side have. What we need to do is shift it where everybody's doing the same type of reporting. So then we can say with confidence, okay, those are all recurring gifts that are coming from this type of channel, for
Right.
instance.
So there are some
So yeah.
limitations to the data, but there's more data now than there was before. And I don't mean to jump ahead, but when you're looking
Yep.
at 19 years of data and preparing to go into year 20, there are a lot more data providers now, I believe, than
Yes.
there were when you started. So the degree of confidence in everything we're looking at, even on a quarterly, is probably a little bit higher, right? By
Yes.
virtue of having more data and now increasingly more data points.
Yeah, and again, and you and I do a good job at putting the caveats here that there's limits to what somebody like me can say this means, but at the same time, it is one the best that we have by and far, right? That in the nonprofit sector, one of the things, kind of the lament that I see is we don't have the right data. We don't have the right data. And I would make an argument. We do have the right data. We need to deepen the data understanding that we have on this. And that's why the survey that we did that indicated that the majority of people who understand and appreciate this data, and that is one thing we need to increase. And that's why I'm very thankful for you having me on here so we can continue to educate about that. But especially for mid-sized organizations, larger organizations, they use this to help even adjust their strategic plans heading into different parts of the year. And the fact that it is updated monthly is a major thing. Because if we look at even the amazing report that comes out of Giving Institute, that is like 6 months into the next year that we tend to get what happened previously versus it's only a few months, and that's going to actually increase and speed up the more that we work with our data providers on the Giving Tuesday and AFP Foundation side. So I would expect our report turnaround to actually be even more improved going into 2026.
So just kind of summarizing the high points at this point, not only is it dollars up, but donors down, but we're talking about pretty much flat retention rates for both people who are not multiple donors, but donors who give more frequently, as
Yeah.
well as first-time donors. So we aren't looking at a major decline in either cast. But before we started talking, I think you gave me a tip that we have good loyal donors, but the major donors who were a big part of the pie, both in the Giving USA results and with the kinds of things that you follow, that we're seeing some softening there. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. That's, I think that the kind of the way that we could describe this is that one, I do like to view things as an opportunity we have to be real that some specifics here. What we call supersized gifts, $50,000 individual gifts and above, that fell 7.7% compared to 2024 last year. So through June, people who gave very large gifts, we actually saw over 7% drop compared to last year. And then also just overall major donors gave less in Q2 than in Q1. So we are seeing overall like improved monetary increases, but that mid-level in particular, like always needs some love in terms of the people who maybe are giving above that $100 gift all the way up to $5,000. Like that's an area that there's definitely opportunity for engagement. That's where we think that the improved retention rate overall, the weakening of that drop, I think that's where we're going to see, if that continues to be applied toward mid-level segments, even those major donors, then we could stabilize that and go, okay, let's start to work on everybody else.
I know that you don't have a lot of why answers in this for all the reasons you used.
I mean, I have personal opinions, but
sure.
yeah.
But I wonder if you're able to intuit from these $50,000 and above gifts in a way that that you are intuiting from the the donor retention data, that some of these things are what we are doing and not doing as fundraisers. Are you either getting from the data or from your conversations with vendors who feed into this data set, or from just the rest of your work, giving Institute your work at one other places? What may be causing a softening of this category of donor right now?
What I want to do is I want to actually quote, if you don't mind, what Woodrow Rosenbaum said in our briefing that we had recently, because I think it helps address not just your question, but the overall environment too. And so when we did our briefing on the report just like 2 weeks ago, this is what he said. There's renewed interest in stewarding and engaging more broadly, which we've desperately needed and arguably more critical now than ever before. The fact that we're seeing this flattening out of what was a loss of donors quarter after quarter after quarter is potentially encouraging. People are ready to give. And I think this is one of the most important points that Woodrow makes pretty consistently, that's why I'm reinforcing this. So people are ready to give it, and we should take this as an encouraging sign, and that there's an opportunity to lean in and really build that connection with people. And I think that when we look at some of the larger research that's been done on motivational behavior, kind of why people give, it isn't because they were asked, right? We're heading into end of the year. And I think the most dangerous thing that people can do is think, well, they're going to give because I'm just going to ask them. And that's not what we should be approaching this. We shouldn't just say, one, do people give because they were asked in December or because they actually want to give in December? This is something that I think gets brought up as a kind of philosophical question all the time. But I think that people should be invited in to participate in something bigger than themselves from a psychological standpoint. That is a stronger tie than, well, I was asked. And I think that we're pounding that message pretty consistently, but I'm seeing it more and more in my work too, where I'm talking to executive directors that are wearing multiple hats. And instead of just immediately blasting out an email to everybody, we're getting more questions about segmentation. We're getting more inquiries around how to do proper reporting, how to do proper analysis of people. And I think that especially if we continue to see that from the smaller revenue organizations, the people under $1 million, that's who the vast majority of the nonprofit space is small folks under $1 million, under 5 million represents 97% of the sector. If they start doing that type of stewardship and engagement pretty consistently, that will have an amplification effect. That'll actually, in my opinion, help show that no, nonprofits are not only worthy of our attention, are not only worthy of investment by the average everyday donor, but in fact are some of the best things that people can do if they want to make an impact, right? It's not just running out and doing a GoFundMe or mutual aid. It's that still community connected institution like a food bank that we're going to continue to see. These are the people that are making a difference. That's why I want to continue to give them money.
this is where I ask you that impossible to answer question.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and maybe it's an easy one to answer actually, because it has as much to do with not just what's happening and what you predict, but what we should do. And you've been outlining some of the things that people should be doing.
Yeah.
There isn't really a focus usually on the summer for most institutions, although it's an important time. We really tend to focus on the fall, either because we think that's when people give or because that's when we ask them to give, as you just
Yep.
said.
Yep.
But there's another factor right now, which is the Buffett curve, I think that it's referred to, being at 170%, but also statements from people like Jamie Dimon saying he's anticipating a market crash. So
Yeah.
whether or not any of these things are real, whether their prognostications are important or to be taken seriously or not, it is true that we are at a high point with the stock market, and those $50,000 plus gifts tend to be made from assets, therefore typically stock. I'm
Yep.
wondering, how important is it to take note of economic effects of giving right now as we enter the season? And maybe more importantly, how important is it to focus on all the donors, given that the market is at a high and could correct?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. There's a lot to untangle in that one, but I think if we take a long tail view of economic activity, right? Because you always hear like election years influencing or economic activity and stuff like that. I think if we actually step back and look at actual giving behavior, while definitely the more affluent, more sophisticated giving is heavily influenced by something like the stock market, because that is the availability of funds for those people. I think that even if we look at what happened in 2008, if we look at what happened in 2020, for instance, at the same time, when there are also not just economic fluctuations, but societal fluctuations that influence people, people step up. And that's why I generally say, not ignore what's happening in the stock market or anything like that, but you can't control that. So what you can control is your conversation with people. So even something as simple as when Neon One analyzed some recurring giving trends, for instance, May is actually one of the most popular times to start a recurring gift, right? So everybody would ask why, and I think there's taxes and economics and da 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 da. But you know what? Maybe it could be as simple as they were asked. They were asked at that time, and it was the right message at the right time. So I think ultimately to help answer this, Jay, is don't make decisions for your donors, right? And that's including, well, the market's bad or the market's good, so this is why they're going to do a thing. You don't know that. So what you do know is this person gave on this date at this time, and I have a field that told me this is the motivation for that gift, right? Like maybe you have a field in your database that says, what motivated you to give today? That is something you can act on with a lot more confidence than even a FEP report. So I think if we get into the core reasons why people give, then that is going to set up any nonprofit for success, regardless of the economic environment.
Great advice as always, Tim. So when we're looking ahead, when is the next report coming out? When should people be looking for this data?
December, I think, if I'm looking at things correctly and looking at our dates, it should be, I believe, December is the next one. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that. And of course, in the meantime, you told us already where we can get it, but I'll let you repeat it for those who weren't paying attention.
FEPreports.org. That simple.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thanks again to Tim Sarrantonio for sharing that data and analysis. Coming up next in the Philanthropy Mastermind series on the PM podcast, we are just releasing Healthcare Philanthropy Leaders Speak Out. It should be out later today. In it, you'll hear from some of the top voices in the field: Nancy Busani, Julie Cox, John Drake, David Flood, Bill Littlejohn, and Brigitte Strumpf, as they share what's keeping them up at night, what's giving them hope, and how innovation and generosity are reshaping the future of healthcare philanthropy. You can listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or of course at DonorSearch.net or their YouTube channel. Looking ahead, this Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern on How to Raise, our CFRE accredited show, Amy Eisenstein, CEO of Capital Campaign Pro, joins us for Set Your Campaign Up for Success, 3 all-important pre-campaign strategies. So if your organization is thinking about holding a campaign, this session is for you. And of course, Frontlines of Social Good will be back next Tuesday at this time with more top stories and voices shaping the philanthropic landscape. Make sure to check out all of our past episodes of the Philanthropy Mastermind series, Frontlines of Social Good, How to Raise, and the PM podcast on the website of our sponsor, DonorSearch, at donorsearch.net. I'm Jay Frost. Thanks for watching. And as always, take care and do good.